Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for Then and Now, the Fight for Reproductive Freedom. My name is Sydne Clarke, and I come to you from UnTextbooked, a media company and podcast where teens lead interviews with leading historians and leaders. Season 3 is currently in the works with a cast of amazing young changemakers. You can catch seasons 1 and 2 of UnTextbooked on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We are thrilled to be partnering with Random House to bring you this timely event. I'm currently wrapping up my senior year of high school, and I will be attending Howard University in the fall to study political science and minor in Afro-American studies. It is an absolute pleasure to be this evening's moderator. You may be wondering why someone so new to adulthood is moderating this important conversation. Essentially, I hope to represent a young perspective whose generation is coming of age as the Supreme Court changes its opinion on the ruling on Roe v. Wade. As a social justice advocate, I hope to make this conversation an intergenerational discussion and learn from some extraordinary writers and icons of historic moments. Carmen Rita Wong, Austin Channing Brown, and of course, Gloria Steinem. Tonight, we will question what has changed in the past 50 years, what lessons we have learned, and how we, both my generation and those older than myself, can develop our voices and opinions on this hot topic. Before we begin to ponder on those questions, I'd like to go over a few notes to ensure that everyone can access and engage with tonight's conversation. To start, we welcome you to participate in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts on tonight's discussion. We ask everyone to please just stay respectful, and to kick it off, we'd love to hear where everyone is zooming in from. Okay. From Boston, PA. Okay. Virginia, New York, Atlanta, Ohio. Wow, okay. I'm seeing a lot of people. Canada, Nebraska. Wow, all right, okay. Thank you guys, thank you. All right, we also welcome you to submit any questions you have in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. While I can't promise we'll get to everyone's questions, we will be dedicating the last 15 minutes to respond to as many of your questions as time allows. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the program. Finally, if you would like to turn on your closed captions, please click live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with that, I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's panelists. Gloria Steinem is a writer, lecturer, political activist, and feminist organizer. She was a founder of New York and Miss Magazines. She is the author of Moving Forward Beyond Words, Revolution from Within, Outrageous Acts and Everyday Rebellions. She co-founded the National Women's Political Caucus, the Miss Foundation for Women, the Free to Be Foundation, and the Women's Media Center in this country. In 2013, President Obama himself awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor. Austin Channing Brown is a speaker, writer, and media producer providing inspired leadership on racial justice in America. She is the New York Times best-selling author of I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. She is also the president and CEO of Herself Media, a company committed to women-driven storytelling. Austin earned a business management degree and has a master's in social justice. Carmen Rita Wong, finally, is a writer and nonprofit board leader whose board positions include The Moth and the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. She was the co-creator and television host of On the Money on CNBC and was a national advice columnist for Glamour, Latina, Men's Health, and Good Housekeeping. Wong is the author of a series of novels and 2 best-selling advice books. She is the founder and CEO of Malicon Productions, LLC, where she develops female-focused media and entertainment. She also lives in Manhattan with her daughter. And with that, it is my pleasure now to ask our distinguished panelists to join me on the screen. Welcome, Gloria, Austin, and Carmen. Hi, all. So happy to be in discussion with you all. Gloria, I would love to start with you first. Now, the verdict of Roe v. Wade, as you know, was decided in 1973. That was nearly 50 years ago. What do you think has changed since the passing of this revolutionary court case?
It's hard to say completely because, of course, there are many different constituencies. But I think in a general way, the question of reproductive justice, access to safe abortion, all of these issues are much more likely to be talked about openly on the national media and with the help of social justice movements. They were always present, but they weren't so publicly recognized as fundamental. And they are fundamental. So this kind of recognition is a step forward.
Yes, totally. Thank you. Now, for those of us who weren't around 50 years ago, can you please give some insight into what it was like to see Roe v. Wade really come into fruition?
Abortion especially, probably with an abortion was probably needed by something like 1 in 3 women, but it was way more likely to be illegal and dangerous. And you might have to go to Cuba, for instance, or you might have to have many more financial resources or a special relationship with the physician, or the physician was more likely to insist on taking sexual advantage of the woman who was seeking an abortion. All of these things, all of these injustices were way, way more common than I hope and believe and perceive that they are now.
Yes, thank you. And do you remember, can you pinpoint where you were when you heard the verdict of Roe v. Wade being released? And like, what were your feelings and reactions in that moment?
Well, I think mainly it was a public recognition that reproductive rights, reproductive power over life is fundamental, and that it was a proper concern of the highest court in the land. From every regime that I know of has tried to control women's reproductive lives, and the more authoritarian or racist the regime. I mean, for instance, when you should pardon the expression, Hitler was elected, and he was elected, the very first thing he did was to padlock all the family planning clinics and declare abortion a crime against the state. So, and Mussolini did the same thing, so it was a fundament of authoritarianism, and not yet a fundament of national movements for freedom and individual rights.
Thank you so much for that perspective and insight. My final question to you, as a notorious trailblazer and advocate for equality, I must ask this last question on behalf of aspiring change makers such as myself. Throughout your advocacy career, the production of Miss Magazine, being an author and entrepreneur, how were you able to wear these different hats in seemingly the most effective ways throughout your career without burning out in any way? In other words, like, how did you find the will to keep moving on and pushing forward throughout your career?
Well, I think it's very, very, very difficult to do it alone. So we need to reach out to people in our communities, people with similar needs. Hopefully, that's what builds massive social justice movements. It's this need for companionship. We are social animals. That's why isolation is the most common and deepest punishment worldwide, to be kept by yourself. So the presence of movements and companionship and movement friends, it's just, whether it's neighbors or political allies, it is absolutely crucial. So if I would say anything to future and present activists, is don't be alone.
Yes, as the saying goes, it takes a village. It does. Thank you so much, Gloria. Now, moving on to you, Austin. In your book, I'm Still Here, you talk about the different ways racial justice is expressed systematically and felt in our day-to-day lives. As an African-American woman, I'm just interested to know, can you please share your perspective on the ways in which racial justice correlates with the dilemmas in maintaining reproductive freedom?
Just a small intro question, right?
Yeah.
So it's a hard question to answer because there's so many things that are coming together to that impact reproductive health, right, and reproductive rights. So if we begin with a discussion of white supremacy, right, in this country, and how white supremacy has always assumed that it knows better than we do, right? That's the fundamental idea of white supremacy, right? That we are inferior, and because we are inferior, we do not know and cannot be trusted with our own autonomy, right? And not being trusted with our own autonomy has impacted many things, right? It has impacted our access to food, it's impacted our access to job security, it's impacted our access to education, it's impacted it's impacted us on virtually every systemic level, right? And reproductive health and reproductive rights are no different. So let me actually go all the way back, right? And say that even in times of slavery, Black women were responsible, we made ourselves responsible for our own reproductive rights. And it is documented that doctors were going onto plantations trying to figure out why there were disparities between the birth rates in some plantations and the birth rates of others. And discovered it's because Black women were taking on our own autonomy for determining how to have safe abortions. And without being, I'm trying to think of the word. I don't want to make a false equivalency, right? I am no longer enslaved, right? I don't want to make a false equivalency, but there is still a fight around our bodily autonomy, right? There is still a fight that America believes it should have the right to tell us what to do with our own bodies. And the current way of doing that is not having universal health care. It's restricting access to contraceptives. It's restricting access to preventative care. It's not having the transportation to be able to get to the care facilities. It's not generally not being able to choose your own doctor. It's, and those are just the systemic issues before we even get to the individual ones of dealing with doctors, nurses, and providers, right? So I think that's the fastest way for me to answer that question. But the truth is there are a lot of complexities, right, that people of color are facing when it comes to reproductive health and reproductive rights.
I think you answered that in the most perfect way that you could. That was a very compact question. So thank you. And yeah, I just really appreciate, and I'm sure that our viewers and listeners also appreciate you listing some of those complexities because it just runs so deep,
yes.
so deep. And you also talk a lot about allyship in your book. What are some ways in which you see allyship evolving, particularly in regards to the fight of reproductive rights?
Yeah, so I think rather than pointing out something specific, what I would really love to highlight in allyship is the ways in which the idea of following the lead of people of color is becoming much more well-known and followed. I think there was quite a bit of time in which, or at least a season, if you will, in which allyship meant, oh, I know what to do about this, let me fix it, right? As opposed to listening to the people who are impacted. I'm listening to queer voices, listening to trans voices, listening to Black voices, listening to Indigenous voices, right? And saying, oh, you all know what you need, let me help, right? How can I fund this? Who do you need a meeting with? what policy should I vote for, right? And so I think the more that allyship begins to follow the most marginalized communities, I think allyship will stay on track, right? It's when allyship thinks that it knows better that we begin to have these missteps in moving forward.
That is actually so true. Listening to these communities that you're trying to give help to, it's so important listening to their needs instead of immediately offering, your own input.
Exactly. And many times marginalized communities already have a solution, right? It isn't even that they've just thought of one, right? It's that there's one in the works, right? And what we need is more people involved in that solution, not allies who are trying to create something else for the sake of themselves.
Yes. And that's where, the conversation of using your privilege in the most effective ways comes into fruition in that respect. I totally get it. Totally do. My final question to you. How does your faith and views on feminism intersect? Are they sometimes at odds or compatible?
Yeah, so another complicated question, because there are lots of versions of Christianity. So when in a public space, right? So let's say on the gram, for example, when I introduce myself as a Christian, I say I'm very particular in saying the Christianity that I follow is the one in which God stands with the oppressed. Right. And so there are lots of other versions of Christianity out there, but the one that I follow is the one in which God stands with the oppressed, right? So God stands with women, God stands with people who are queer, God stands with the poor, God stands with, right? And in many cases, God is, right? God is poor, God is in the criminal justice system, God is, right, in these marginalized communities. And so for me, feminism, autonomy, making decisions is not in any way at odds with the God that I worship, right? But I want to acknowledge that there are plenty of other Christianities that we are fighting against because patriarchy is so embedded and is in fact fundamental to the idea of God and Godship, right? And so it is a fundamentally different theology that I practice compared to the sort of idea of Christianity, particularly white evangelical Christianity.
Yes. Wow. Thank you for that. And I think just with religion overall, any religion that you follow, I think sometimes society has a way of weaponizing it because we view aspects of religion and through a very, I guess, linear lens, when in reality, religion is a very personal thing. So everyone holds a lot of the times their own values and they interpret it within their own, religious views and values as well. So I do very much appreciate that perspective as well. And again, sure, our listeners and viewers do as well. Thank you so much for your fruitful responses, Gloria and Austin. Now, finally, Carmen, on to you. Now, your book, Why Didn't You Tell Me, which is coming out this July, deals with the relationship of your family, along with their complications with racism, sexism, and the search for identity. How do you feel your upbringing affected your opinions on reproductive rights today?
Hugely, very much so. My mother is a Dominican immigrant, Afro-Latina, who was brought to this country and undocumented and essentially sold off by her father to start the, legitimate process of immigration in the family. And it was a very abusive marriage. I found out later in adulthood that I was the third scheduled abortion. And my mother, I had an older brother. She had been trying to be in other relationships to escape the relationship. And I'm going to be 51, so those abortions were before it was legal. I'm a living example of, and my mother was an example of how you can outlaw abortion there. It's going to happen, right? The question is it going to be safe? Are women going to be protected? Are they going to all have access or equal access or support? And she did not have, of course, in Latin culture, there's no sex education, there's no talking about these things in Latin Catholic culture. She eventually remarried Anglo-American man, and he was very Catholic. 4 children back to back to back. He didn't believe in birth control, and she almost died with the last one. I grew up watching this, and my mother was such an intelligent, ambitious woman, defined by her reproductive system and the lack of freedom and autonomy, not seen as a full human being. So you can believe that as soon as I needed it, I was building an abortion fund, and I knew exactly where to go. I knew who was going to drive me there. I knew what my cover story was. I knew all these things because I knew that the choice to be able to determine my life was incredibly important, and I saw her suffer. So I needed to break that generational cycle, right? And that's why I was so passionate with working with Planned Parenthood. But yes, so that's a lot of that's covered in the book. It's needs to stop. I want it to stop very much.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. And you did mention, your work with Planned Parenthood. That's a perfect transition into my next question. With your positions with the Moth and Planned Parenthood, what has your time with these companies taught you? And what's something you wish more people knew?
Well, I wish folks knew, first of all, a lot has changed since I had started with Planned Parenthood. I started back before the election, 2016, when the temperature and the feeling and the assumptions were very different as to where this country was going, where our rights were going as people who can reproduce, right? Or who have the organs. I think a couple things. First, I have a 15-year-old daughter. So I see young people and I just want them to know that they're not alone. There's a huge, enormous army and system of people who can help you, right? I'll say this, like Austin mentioned, what I hope the most is, and what I've seen in action, because the Federation has changed quite a bit and the movement has changed quite a bit, not only in response to what's happened, but to the fact that for us, for Black and Latino women, for women of color, we kind of saw this coming. We knew a lot, but we did not have the power or the positions to be able to speak loud enough to get things done, right? So that has changed quite a bit and continues to change. And that gives me so much hope with whether it's the larger organizations or the grassroots organizations. For example, I was the first vice chair to be a woman of color, queer as well. Like, this is very important. I was able to change the makeup of the board and diversify the board and bring on trans and Black, Latina, and Asian, and all of that. We need to be put in these positions of power, right? And that's happening. It needs to happen more. I think that's very important.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I especially just want to note like that sentiment that you said that for women of color, a lot of the things going on in our social climate as of today really did not come as that much of a shock, because throughout history, we have been very used to facing setbacks in terms of, our rights, in terms of our autonomy in all forms. So I think that is just something that was so powerful to even note, but also very unfortunate and melancholy at the same time. Mm-hmm. And my final question to you, Carmen, you happen to be a mother, as you said, to a 15-year-old daughter. How do you navigate conversations on reproductive rights in particular with your daughter?
Easy. I have them all the time. No, I'll tell you this. She definitely was advanced in that area, nothing like I was raised. I mean, I got my information from sneaking Cosmo magazine at my mother's doctor's appointments. We have open conversations about this, and she educates when asked. I hope I don't get any phone calls, but her friends and people asking questions, because this is still not covered in the most progressive of schools. you still have them separating genders to learn about sex education when they should be all together to learn about each other's, right? So I'm hoping though, and I have to say that when I see young people today, like you, Sydney, and like my daughter, you are so much more well-informed. You have the power of technology. You have the power of connection, such natural connection across the country, right? So you will have access to more resources. I think that we have a lot of hope, Soldier folk, in you and what you're going to do. I think sex education, I have to say, is one of the most, not the most important way to change a lot of people's lives, right? I had a gentleman I bumped into, which I bump into every morning when I get coffee. He says to me, "Oh my God, Carmen, my daughter," he's Latino, right? And he says, "Oh my God, Carmen, my daughter, they're doing sex ed in school. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do?" I said, "Listen, you know me, right? Good. Good." He was so scared. I said, "Good. Do you know that having that education means that she's less likely not only to get pregnant if she doesn't want to, but to know all sorts of things about her body and to lead a better life." And we need to get that message out there. And I know it's very hard. Austin, you brought up, of course, religion. This is so difficult. It cannot be an instrument to keep us down. And also one last thing, it's not just about pregnancy. My daughter's a long COVID sufferer. She is disabled by long COVID. And one of the issues that she has, which is POTS, which is tachycardia, is made very much worse by teenage hormones. And she is, and I'm allowed to share this, on hormone therapy, AKA birth control, at the age of 14 last year to help with her symptoms, or else she would be bedbound 1 week every month. I had fibroids and fibroid surgery. I was on the pill for that and IUD. We have to understand that this is a lot about much more than just pregnancy. This is about our quality of life, period. So, period. Oh, that was a joke. Our full bodies as full human beings need to be protected, and trans as well, very, very much so. This is scary for trans Americans, very much.
It is. And thank you so much. And just based on the chat, there are a lot of people who are very much agreeing with you and your sentiments that you presented. And yeah, I think to wrap up, actually, well, not to wrap up, I actually have a few questions that I want to pose to all of you guys. You guys can feel free to answer in the order that I presented, or if anyone just wants to, free ball it, take it, by all means do it. The first question that I have, we were talking about, adolescents, teens. Carmen, you just brought up, girls and, well, yeah, girls. I just want to know, guys, is there anything you'd like to say to the young men and women that are currently coming of age in the social climate? Any words of advice?
Do what you love. Do what you love so much you forget what time it is when you're doing it. That is a gift that too few of us may have, but it's a gift we all deserve.
Yes.
Mine would be, to the degree possible, to not let society tell you your worth. Right? To not let society dictate how you think of yourself, right? That you are worthy of autonomy, no matter what the Supreme Court says. You are worthy of healthcare, no matter how this country votes. You are worthy, right? That you are worthy of the justice that we're all fighting for. And I hope that you know that in your bones.
Oh, I'll just say, you are very much not alone to reach out, to not be ashamed or afraid to reach out, to seek out. I hope you can, whether it's through social media or however, you can get information safely. Even we know that a lot of sites that deal with reproductive health have ways for you to quickly erase or get out or hide where you've been, just in case, someone's looking, like your parents. just know that you're not alone. It is out there, and to feel, just do not feel shame. This is something that is put on us. And, you know, I always used to say to myself when I was little, before I really knew I was this little feminist, was, do boys do this? If they don't feel shame, I'm not going to feel shame either. We need to be equal in that way. So just know that, know that.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Next, obviously, you know, reproductive rights has been a very controversial topic since the beginning of time. How do you guys approach like these types of conversations, especially with people who, you know, actively disagree with you?
Well, I would say first to remind everyone that reproductive freedom means both the right not to have children and the right to have children. That it is about free will and autonomy, and by protecting that freedom, I hope and believe I'm protecting the right of women who want to have children.
Yes.
I'm not gonna lie, I work pretty hard not to have a whole lot of conversations with people who actively disagree with me on this. But I recognize that the ability to is important. So I would say that the first thing I do is always try to figure out whether or not this is a debate to change my mind, or if someone is really trying to have a conversation to understand, right? So I want to know what the boundaries of the conversation are. And if there is receptivity, then for me, it's all about imagining. Can the person across from me imagine a life that is different from their own? Mm-hmm. Can they imagine being in my shoes, right? Can they imagine being in Carmen's? Can they imagine, right? Can they imagine living a different life than the one they live? Can they imagine more complexities? Can they imagine more nuance? Can they imagine, right, situations in which all of these things would be helpful, right? All these would be, at minimum, helpful, right? At most, a right and an issue of freedom, you know? So those are my two when I venture out of my bubble.
It's the essence of empathy.
Oh, I'm like Austin. I'm exhausted. I don't seek out those conversations. It's exhausting. However, I did grow up with that, and I had to talk about it a lot and fight it a lot. And you know, what I used to say when I was a kid to my parents was, you know, I got 2 arms and 2 legs and a brain just like that guy. Why don't I have that? Why does he's not police? Why is my body, you know, I have 2 arms, 2 legs. I would just always go back to just the basics of being a physical, full human being. And, you know, to Austin's point, it's like when we get in these discussions or when we have to have them or presented with them, I initially too see, is this person just trying to, you know, get it out there and does not care in the world that their opinion is going to change? Or are they really open to discussion? Like I mentioned, that gentleman with his daughter talking to me, he was open to discussion. We trusted each other to have that discussion. But you have to assess that situation. Is it worthwhile? Because I have to say, when you've been having these conversations or discussions and for your whole life, it costs us. It costs a lot. And you get tired of paying the price of living in brown, black skin and being a woman. So I think you have to decide and know that sometimes you don't have to answer those questions and you don't have to have those conversations.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. You all said so many great things. And I think just everyone can take little anecdotes from each answer that you guys presented and apply them to life for themselves and how they carry on conversations, uncomfortable conversations with people in their life. Overall, you get to pick and choose which kinds of conversations that you want to have and carry on with, whether or not you have to ask yourself, as Austin mentioned, is it going to be productive to me? Are they listening to hear me? You know, as the saying goes, are they listening to understand or just to reply? You really have to pick those battles. And another question that I want to pose, not only is this an intergenerational dialogue, it is also a multiracial one. I'm just curious to know, as women in America, we all know how just, I guess, hard the fight has been to maintain reproductive freedom. But that experience, even though that is something that we all share in common, given our racial identities and backgrounds, it looks different. So I just want to know from each of you, what have you as being a woman of color or being a woman in white-skinned identity, what has been, I guess, the most poignant or significant experience that you've taken in life as of now? Again, sorry, that's a very compacted question, but it's just something I thought of.
Well, I would just say that the most clear and yet perhaps least often talked about fact of our nation is that we are on the verge of becoming a majority people of color country. The first generation of babies who are majority babies of color has already been born. That seems to me a kind of good thing. I mean, you know, we're going to be more like the rest of the world, have better food. I don't know, you know, it seems positive, but it does not seem positive to that proportion of the country that is really racist and really feels, you know, that this is somehow a defeat. And I think that their knowledge that we are at this point of becoming a majority people of color country is part of the reason for this kind of insane, unpredictable opposition to reproductive justice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think my response would be around the importance of intersectionality. I think, you know, I think lots of the terminology that we use in social justice can be expansive or it can be restrictive, right? And it depends on how we use it. And I think there is a movement now in which women of color don't want their issues to be subsumed under this sort of uniform approach to social or racial justice, right? That as a Black woman, there are specific issues in the Black community that I want addressed, right? But for Latinas, the same thing, right? That there are, right? And for those Asian women and for Indigenous women, right? And I think sometimes what happens is the way that we use our language, right, isn't used to uplift intersectionality, right? It's used to downplay it. And so I hope that as we move forward, that we will, as women of color, right, that we will see ourselves as bringing all of our nuances to the table, that we can trust one another to see what those nuances are, right? And to be able to lift all of them up, as opposed to trying to find sort of the lowest common denominator, right? And therefore not using all of our power as women of color to address all the various nuances that we face. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, I think there is so much power, right, in the ways that all women could come together, and the ways that women of color could be a real practice of power, right? But only if we begin to see ourselves, right, and to see the intersectional barriers that each of us are facing, and figure out how to lift all of those up, as opposed to asking everybody to ignore those differences and just fight for like this one little corner over here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that, because look, Latinx, Latina, it's not a race. It's not a color. It's, I'm Caribbean Latina, I'm Afro Latina. Then you have, you know, Mexican, you have Central American, you have all different, right? White Latinas. So we can't treat things as a monolith. I will say this, two things about my beloved Latin culture is one, we've got a double whammy a lot, that you have the white majority looking to control, right? Then within families and some patriarchal culture issues and religion as well, within the family, the pressures are incredible. And I'll say this, we gotta get, I know, I can't believe I'm bringing this up. We gotta get men and boys to understand, because that is gonna be one of the keys in the Latinx community to really push, get some of that pressure off the women. Because if you have homes where, like I grew up in, where what dad says, what papi says goes, this is what happens. We really need to bring on the boys and the men to get to know us, to get to know our bodies, to see us as full people. And I believe too, Austin, like that's part of the intersectionality, you know, as well. So, I mean, can you imagine if they all teamed up with us too?
Yeah.
Be incredible.
Totally. Wow. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for your answers. And again, based on the chat, everyone is loving your responses as well. Now we are at the portion of the event where we can now do the answering of the live Q&A. I will begin. Okay, so there was a question posed. When thinking about reproductive rights and the impact on Black and Brown bodies, Dr. Sim's work was about maximizing one's investment and produce more labor. We don't really talk about the mothers of gynecology, enslaved women who were nurses, patients, midwives, and agricultural workers all at the same time. How can we be conscious about the potential impact of dismantling Roe v. Wade will have on Black and Brown bodies? Austin Channing Brown is answering the area of my question as I'm typing. But yeah, anybody want to take that? Anyone's?
Austin.
I don't think I have more to add.
That was great.
You know,
You really did talk about it a lot.
except to say it's a new iteration of the same song, right? It's just a new iteration of the same song. And as we did in history, we have to continue to figure out how to maintain our own autonomy. And we have to fight like hell. Like, I don't know. I don't know what else to say, you know, like we have to fight like hell. We have to use our community. We have to use technology. We have to be for one another. We have to fight against all of these systems of injustice. And as Gloria said, the only way to do that is to do it together, you know. I wish there was like a 10-step program, right? Like here are the 10 steps to make sure that Black and Brown people, right, can actually have the freedoms that they deserve. But the truth is, it takes all of us, and it takes all of us working on the areas that we care deeply about, right? So if you care about education, that matters. If you care about reproductive rights, that matters. If you care about the criminal justice system, that matters. If, right, that we all have to work as if we believe in our own freedom.
And I think it's interesting sometimes to look and see who our companions are, either in the present or history, because we can learn a lot from that. And in fact, when you should pardon the expression, Hitler was elected, and he was indeed elected, the first thing he did the very next morning was to padlock all the family planning clinics and declare abortion a crime against the state, because the whole idea, was to have children, for the Reich, and of course he was dealing with Jews in a far more drastic way. And Mussolini also, I believe, started out by trying to suppress reproductive rights. So I think that tells us something about the basic issues and origin of authoritarian regimes and the basis of democracy, which is the opposite, which is each of us able to make our own decisions.
Mm-hmm. I'll say this coming from a economics background, if we can understand that the reduction of us in kind of the human rank as quasi-subhuman, right? That this has everything to do with resources and scarcity and power, so that we don't take it personally and feel that reduction, belittle ourselves, to know the history, of course, of those who came before us and built us. I'm so happy that young people are seeing so much more history, and everybody of all ages, so much more history coming out and alive. We're hearing more names and more voices, but understand that this really has so much to do, whether it's weaponizing religion, whether it's, locking up all the clinics. It's all about competition for resources and power over resources. When you know that, it's kind of like dealing with, financial abuse. I would give advice about financial abuse. When you know what's important to the person who wants the power, then you can think of other ways to get what you need. It's very key to understanding that.
Yes, thank you.
I don't know if this is a relevant point, but it's always interested me that Pope Pius IX, which was in the late 1800s, I believe, the Vatican regulated abortion. They didn't forbid it. They actually allowed the abortion of a female fetus longer than a male fetus, because they wrongly thought that men being superior quickened earlier, right? And it was Napoleon III who pressured the Vatican to outlaw abortion, because Napoleon III wanted more people for his army. I mean, right. I just say that because I think, not that it answers everything, but it helps to demystify the reasons why we have ended up with policies that restrict our individual freedom.
Yes, thank you so much. And Gloria, I'm going to pose this next question to you because it was asked from a person who was an activist in the 60s. They wanted to know, how do other older activists make a difference now? It mattered then, now it doesn't seem to, they think.
Oh, no, I think, first of all, we have the joy of seeing younger activists like you. I mean, I can't tell you what pleasure it gives to me to see the three of you, right? Yeah. And we have some lessons to teach, from our experience in the past, to the extent, not to try to impose our advice, but to offer our advice for whatever it's worth. And on top of that, there is a bias against age. So, that's another bias that we need to be aware of. It's present in our laws about when you have to retire, who you hire, who's supposed to be fun and a good dancer and who isn't, I don't know. There are all kinds of biases that have to do with age that are also fun to get rid of.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to add into that or move on?
I just want to say, we need you.
Yeah,
we
for real.
need you.
I'm not going anywhere.
The wisdom is
too interesting.
Everything.
I'm staying here.
Okay.
And dance always.
No, thank you. Okay, next question. Over the 50 years since Roe, opponents to abortion rights have made this a reason to vote, while those who support them have not, as evidenced by the makeup of state legislators in the Supreme Court. Have we missed the opportunity to sustain reproductive choice? It will take years to undo the trigger laws going into effect if Roe is overturned. Thoughts on that?
I don't know if the idea that we haven't made this a condition of our voting is entirely true. I think, you know, the positions in favor of reproductive justice and against discrimination of all the different varieties are pretty basic. With you know, obviously not with every, but with probably with the majority.
Thank you. Austin, Carmen? I know it's a very exact question.
I'll just say very quickly, I just worry about state to state. I hate seeing this state to state. When we look at the maps, that's just devastating. This should be a nationwide freedom, right? So that's what I'm kind of paying attention to and looking at, and in terms of, you know, ability and access to voting rights, those sort of things. My gosh, are those have everything to do with our ability to have autonomy in our bodies. And I hope that things change. I think it's going to take some time.
No, you're right in that, especially at the level of information. How many people know who their state representatives are? We're way more likely to know who our congressional representatives are than those state by state. And that's a problem.
Big problem.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the next question, which kind of correlates to a question that I asked Gloria earlier. Where do you all draw your motivation and energy from over the long term as activists? What keeps you moving forward through these challenges?
I've been talking too much. I think the three of you should.
Austin, you first.
Gloria, there is no such thing as you talking too much.
I know, right?
We would all sit here like,
I don't know about that.
You know, as a racial justice advocate, especially over the last few years, I think the question that I get asked most often is about hope. So like, are you hopeful? Are you hopeful that things will change? Are you hopeful? Have the protests made you hopeful? Right? Everything is about hope. And I think that hope is really nice, but it's not necessarily what you do the work out of. Right? Like hope is nice when you can get it, you know, but if we relied on hope, there would be a lot fewer activists in the world. And I think that the truth for me, right, personally, is that I do this work out of duty, right? Out of duty to myself, because I am right here, right now, a citizen of America who deserves full autonomy, period, right? Now, when I get tired, sometimes I have to look at my ancestors, right? I have to look at Angela Davis and Gloria and, you know, like, and I can draw strength from that, you know? And sometimes I look at my own baby and I think, you know what? You're not gonna deal with this, you know, or at least I'm gonna do my best, right? So that you don't have to deal with this. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to recognize my own personhood, right? And to the degree that I can, force America to live up to its own promise. You know, and because I'm worthy of that. I am deserving of that. I am a whole person. I'm worthy of that. And so, so for me, duty is often what drives me, but it's a duty to myself, a duty to my autonomy, a duty to my dignity, my inherent dignity as a person.
Thank you so much for that. Oh my God, yeah, fingers snaps, all of it. Yeah.
I will right on that one. The funniest thing, I joke that my mother my Dominican mother raised me as an entitled white American man. And it's been used against me many times. How dare I think I am worthy? How dare I think so highly of myself? Listen, I don't. I just think I'm just equal. I just think I think I'm worth just as much. I always have. It's gotten me in trouble a lot, but I believe it. And I believe it since I was a child. And maybe it helped that I had an older brother. So I could see how, even though she treated me that way, she also bought into the patriarchy by treating him as the little emperor. So I could see and fight, that brother, older brother, younger sister thing, and say, well, that's not fair. And that's not fair. And since I was a kid, I just was like, it's not fair. It's not right. I'm just as smart. I got 2 arms and 2 legs. I got a brain. It's got to be that way for everybody. For everybody. And no matter what gender you want to be, or no matter what your sexuality, you are still a full person with those full rights. And I believe it so much that it just almost hurts. It comes out of my pores, and it's infused everything I've done, from finance to economics to media to journalism, and to my daughter too. Just any woman I can come in contact with, or girl or anyone, we have to believe this to our core. The world can tell us we're not worthy. We're not as worthy. I had a very powerful person who I met, a very powerful man, white man, very powerful, say, well, of course women want children. Of course they all want babies. This is, these are people that have the ultimate power in this world. They still think these sort of things. And meanwhile, I'm like, well, you got something between your legs that frankly can make lots of babies. And that doesn't determine your life. So we have to, I know, excuse me, we're talking to teenagers here, but you get it, come on. We have to really talk back to that, understand at the deepest level that what's coming at us in terms of this rhetoric, this controlling thing, what it's based in, and know our own truth and know our own value. Like Gloria and Austin said, we have to know that we are valued and just as worthy. And that'll make you fight in every aspect of your life.
No, I was just thinking when you were speaking that it's the things I've heard. I mean, because I lived in India for a couple of years. I don't know. The most common things that kids say are, "It's not fair," and "You are not the boss of me." And both those things are
Guilty.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Gonna
keep
be our
that
new
up.
mantras. You're not the boss of me.
Right.
Keep that up. Keep doing it. It's not fair. Yeah.
Okay, well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have to answer questions. I'm so sorry to everyone else who asked. We couldn't get to all of them, but I believe everyone, I can speak on behalf of everyone, appreciated all of the answers that you guys had to offer. And with that being said, I would just like to thank Random House again for facilitating this amazing intergenerational conversation. And once again, thank you so much. Thank you, Gloria, Austin, and Carmen, for being a part of this discussion. It wouldn't be a discussion without the 3 of you guys. You guys provided such fruitful answers that I personally will be taking to heart, and a lot of just wise anecdotes that and I'm sure a lot of the other viewers and listeners will be taking to heart as well. And once again, and I'm speaking on behalf of UnTextbooked, Season 3, if you guys missed it in the beginning, Season 3 is currently in the works, and you guys can watch previous seasons on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And with that, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your night, and it has been a pleasure moderating this event. Thank you once again. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.